Test 1, 2, 3. Perfect. People to join us. Hello.
Hi.
Are you able to see my screen on the Hangout window?
Thanks so much, Derek. Yes, I am. I have Scratch the Cat.
Perfect. Yes. Excellent. Have you used Scratch before?
Never.
Okay. Awesome. Hi, Melody. Just unmute her camera and microphone. Okay, I'm just going to wait a few more minutes. There's one other person that was trying to connect. I don't know if they were going to be able to make it for the session right now, but just a minute or two more. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to unmute your microphones if you have them, and we can get started. If you guys have questions, just so you're aware, on the left-hand side of the Hangouts window, if you kind of move your mouse to that side, there should be a button for Q&A. If you guys have any questions that pop up in the middle of something that I'm demoing, feel free to hit the Q&A button and ask a question down at the bottom, and it'll basically just make a list of questions for me that I can answer as we go along. Melody, I'm not sure if you have a microphone or not. It's showing you muted. So if you don't have a microphone, feel free to ask your questions there. Or I also have our Slack channel set up that some of you guys are in. It's sparkappleague.slack.com, and I'll be checking that periodically for questions as well. Okay? Let's get started. Okay, so if everybody's got a Scratch account set up, when you log into Scratch, you should see this window that I'm showing on the screen. If you haven't set up a Scratch account yet, you should be able to go to sparkappleague.com, and on the teacher training link that's on the right-hand side of the homepage, there's instructions and a video on how to set up a Scratch account, how to set up an account for Slack, which is our chat program, and then basically just how to get connected with Google Hangouts and everything. So if you ever get stuck, feel free to go there. For next week and the week after, we're going to be doing these training sessions at least for the next 3 weeks after this, and then into March the student training will start, and I might continue some teacher training sessions if you guys feel they're necessary. So once you're logged in, you should see Scratch the Cat in the middle of this left-hand section here. This is called the stage, and it's basically where all of our games are going to live. When you run your game, this is where actual action is going to take place. This is where the students will click or tap or touch or do whatever they need to do to actually use their game. So it's kind of split into 3 sections. We've got the stage here with a Sprites window, and I'll go over that in just a second. We have the actual Scratch blocks here in the middle. There's tabs called scripts, costumes, and sounds. And then on the right-hand side, we have what's called the Scratch workspace. And the workspace is just where we're going to drag all of our blocks to actually do our code. So if you've never coded before, this is basically where all the work is going to happen and where we're going to actually make our step-by-step instructions for Scratch the Cat or whatever character you use to follow. So to start, Scratch the Cat in the middle here is what's called a sprite. If you look below that, you'll see that there's a little panel here labeled as sprites. Sprites are, in the most basic sense, just characters or items. Anything that has any kind of action or that can move or that can have any kind of interactivity to it, that would be called a sprite. Okay. Other than a sprite, the only other real items or the only other things that you'll see in the Scratch editor are what are called backdrops. And these are here on the left-hand side. You'll see our stage here as a backdrop. Backdrops are basically static, non-moving items. They are visual, so you can have an image or something to that effect, but they don't move. You can't interact with them. They don't actually do anything except for set up the level or the stage of the game. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So to start, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get Scratch the Cat to move around. Okay. If you look in that blocks area under script, you'll notice that we're under the motion section, which is our very, very most basic type of block in Scratch. If you look through the list, and we'll go over these in detail kind of as we continue on, but if you look through the list, it should be pretty easy to figure out what most of these blocks do. And if you want to test what they do, then all you need to do is make sure that you have Scratch clicked in the sprite panel so that he's got the little box surrounding him, and then just double click on one of these blocks. When you double click, you'll see kind of a little flash, and then you'll see Scratch the Cat move. Now in this particular case, this block says move 10 steps. So he's moving 10 steps to the right. The Scratch stage is set up, and you can see as I move my mouse around here in the bottom right-hand corner, it's actually telling me the X and Y coordinates of where I'm at. So what you might notice is that the dead center of the stage, if I can get here, is 0, 0. So right here in the middle is 0, 0. So when I say move 10 steps, what that means is this character is going to move 10 pixels or 10 notches to the right. If I make that a negative number and then double click it, he's going to move 10 notches to the left. Every time I double click on it, he's going to move to the left, to the left, to the left. If I make it a positive, he'll move to the right. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. In the upper right-hand corner of our workspace, you'll also see a small picture of Scratch along with X and Y coordinates. These also tell you what your current XY coordinates are for the character or the sprite that you currently have highlighted. So you'll also see those update as I move Scratch to the left and the right there too. This is a really easy way to kind of keep track of where he is on the stage. As you get more and more sprites on the screen and the game gets a little bit more complicated, it might be easier to keep track of it there. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to go into is what are called the control blocks, or sorry, the event blocks. In order for our game to actually do anything, we need to take these motion blocks and actually make them wait for something to happen before they actually execute. We can sit here and double click on these all day to get the character to move, but that's not very much of a game. So Scratch has the ability to basically wait for what are called events. And events are just kind of how it sounds. Scratch is waiting for a specific thing to happen in your game, whether it be the game starts and the character goes right away, or as you can tell just by looking at these blocks, when certain keys on the keyboard are pressed, we can make actions happen. When a sprite or an item is clicked, we can make something happen. So in this case, we're going to start with this very first one, which just says when flag clicked. And all that means is on the Scratch stage, we have a green flag up here in the upper right-hand corner. That basically just says go. It's the same thing on your computer or on your phone as double-clicking in an app to start it. The flag will start the app or the game, and then Scratch will do whatever we tell it to do. So if I drag this when flag clicked into our workspace, and then drag a couple of those motion blocks, in this case, move 10 steps, move 10 steps, and then click the green flag, Scratch is going to jump that many steps to the right. Okay. And if I make these negative, I'll just alternate them. This will basically, once I hit the green flag, will cause Scratch to move 10 steps to the left, 10 steps to the right, 10 steps to the left, and 10 steps to the right. So when I click this green arrow, you might expect those exact steps to happen. But I'm clicking the green arrow, and that's not exactly what's happening. Okay. If you can figure out why, it's basically just because when you click the green flag, Scratch performs these all in the exact order that you list them immediately. So he is actually moving 10 steps to the left, 10 steps to the right, 10 steps to the left, 10 steps to the right. But he's doing it so quickly that we never actually get to see it. Computers are way faster than we are. So this is just happening instantaneously. He's jumping back, forth in the blink of an eye before we can even see anything happen. So one of the things that we can do in Scratch is we can force the program to wait for certain things to happen. Okay. Under the Control tab of our script, there's a wait block. So I'm just going to move a couple of these wait blocks. And just like it sounds, all it's going to do is it's going to make Scratch do this move, wait a second, do this move, wait a second, and so forth. So now if I hit the green flag, it'll kind of jiggle back and forth slowly. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, again, this still isn't much of a game at this point, but we've got kind of the foundation for how to make a game already. Even with just these few little movements, we can put some things together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move Scratch just by clicking and dragging him to a spot on the screen, and I'm going to set a stage for our game so that we actually have something that's a little bit more visually interesting. So down here under the Sprite panel, I'm going to click on our backdrop that we have. And below it, it has some buttons to choose a backdrop, to paint a new backdrop, to use a backdrop from a file if I have pictures or images that are on my computer, or I can even use a camera, the camera that's on my computer, to take a picture of what I want the backdrop to be. In this case, I'm just going to load one from the library. They have a nice soccer one, and I'm going to choose soccer stadium here. And you'll notice that right away, our stage updates. This section in the middle switches to our backdrops tab, and it shows my goal. So now it looks like Scratch the Cat, and I'll align him a little bit better here. It looks like he's in front of a soccer goal. Okay. So now if I go back to my script section, I'm going to delete these blocks that we have so far. And I'm going to use one of these blocks that says go to X equals whatever and Y equals whatever. These blocks actually update as I move Scratch around and tell Scratch to go to the specific spot that I've put him in. So in this case, I don't want Scratch to start off next to the goal if somebody has moved him. So I'm going to start him off on the left-hand side of the screen. My numbers update here. And I'm going to drag him under that button. So every time we start our game, he returns back to the same spot before anything happens. Okay. I also like to drag a second copy of this block over to the side. If you'll remember when we started at the beginning, you can double click on these blocks to reset the character's position. So if at any point I accidentally move Scratch somewhere that I don't want him to be, rather than having to start my whole game, I can just double click on this block and it'll send him back to that spot. When our games get a little bit more complicated, that'll come in really, really handy. Okay, so now we need Scratch to have something to do. So I'm going to add a sprite this time. In the same section with our backdrops and our current Scratch the Cat sprite, the first thing I want to do is change the name of this sprite so that I can identify it amongst the other ones. Right now, because it's the only sprite we have, it's pretty easy to identify, but later on it's going to get a little bit more complicated. So I want to click this lowercase letter I and just change him to Scratch. And then I'll hit the blue arrow to back up. And that'll change his name right underneath here. And then I'm going to add another sprite from our library. So using that same button, I'm scroll through and try to find a soccer ball. So we get a second sprite. Same thing happens. I can select either Scratch or the soccer ball. You'll notice that as I click from one to the other, the stage updates so I can see what blocks I've assigned to Scratch and which blocks I've assigned to the soccer ball. And just like with Scratch, I'm going to move the soccer ball into place. Grab our green flag. And I'm going to set this up exactly the same way as I set up Scratch. So the only difference between the two so far should be that the actual positions are different. X and Y positions are different for Scratch and for the ball. Now, the ball's a little oversized, so I'm going to move into our next section. Basically, these top four are the basic Scratch block types. So the only one we haven't covered right now is looks. And I'm going to go into looks to change how this soccer ball looks. Namely, I want it to be about half of its current size. So if I look through the looks blocks, there's some hello blocks that allow our character to talk. There's some show and hide blocks. The very bottom, though, are our size blocks. I can change the size by a certain amount, or I can actually set it to a percentage. In this case, I'm going to set our soccer ball to 50%. Now, whenever I hit the green flag, our soccer ball will reset to 50% of its size. So far, so good?
Yes.
Any questions on what we've done so far?
No.
Okay. So now, what I want to happen is I want Scratch to move when the game starts to the right of the screen and basically kick the ball into the goal. Okay. So I need to go into our motion tab and I need to tell Scratch to move either a certain number of steps, or I can tell him to go to a specific spot, or we have a third option here which says glide. And glide is a little bit different, and I'll go through each of these so you can see the difference. But I'll change these amounts so they're a little bit higher. Let's do 150. If I hit go now, Scratch is going to move 150 steps to the right. Okay, I'll reset him. And then I'll click again. And you'll notice he kind of just disappears from the first spot and appears in the second spot. He doesn't really move anywhere. He just kind of vanishes and then reappears at the spot that he thinks he's supposed to be. So that's what the move block does. Our go-to block, as we saw, works similarly. It just flashes the character or the sprite to that section. But then the glide block is a little bit different. In this case, I'm going to say when the flag starts, take 2 seconds to move from wherever Scratch currently is to this new spot. Now I decided to move him 150 pixels or 150 steps to the right. So in this case, I just need to subtract 150. Or actually, in this case, add, since I'm moving to the right, not subtract. And now when I hit the green flag, Scratch kind of moves to the right. He glides from the spot that he was over to the right. And because I have my go-to block also, every time I click the green flag, he'll reset to that spot. So here we have our very, very most basic type of movement in Scratch. Okay, now the second thing we need to do, I'm going to reset Scratch, is make the ball move. So we're going to do the same type of thing. We're going to tell the ball to start at one spot and then glide to another spot. So again, as I drag the ball to its new spot, you'll notice that all these numbers here update. So I can take the glide block. I'm going to do the same thing as Scratch and tell it to glide over 2 seconds. And now when I click, the ball moves and Scratch moves. Although that's not exactly in the goal, so let's retry that. Okay, so now Scratch moves, the ball moves. But one of the things you'll notice is that the ball just kind of starts moving on its own. Scratch doesn't actually touch it. It just kind of starts moving as soon as the game starts, or as soon as our project starts. So what we need to do is, instead of telling the ball to move as soon as we start the game, we need to tell it to move only when Scratch touches it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these blocks, because these are all correct, so we don't want to get rid of those. But I'm going to get rid of this main block. So I'm going to break them apart first, and then just delete that single block. And now what happens is we need to determine or figure out how to get Scratch to detect, or the ball to detect, when Scratch is touching it. Okay? This is called sensing. Over here we have sensing blocks that basically check yes or no, is one thing touching some other thing. So in this case, there's a drop down here. And I can check if it touches the mouse, if it touches the edge of the screen, or if it touches Scratch the cat. Okay, so I'm just going to drag this onto our canvas. Now, one of the things you might notice is that this block is shaped differently from some of the other blocks. The reason for that is you can tell what type of block a block is, or what it does, by the shape. These blocks that have these indents at the top and the little tabs down at the bottom are blocks that you can stitch together. These blocks that are kind of like this jewel shape are what are called control blocks. Okay, if you look in the control section, you'll see some of these little blocks here that have a similar gem shape in them that looks like it's kind of recessed. And what that does is that just means that we have a spot to put these blocks in. So if I drag one of those blocks over, I can drag this other block into that section. Does that make sense? So what I need to figure out, using some combination of these blocks, I need to get our game to only move the ball if it's touching Scratch the cat. Okay? So these blocks in the middle are called if blocks, or if loops. And what they do is they just check whether or not something's happening. like you just saw, I can drag our little gem into this section. And this basically says, if this thing in the middle is true, then do something. So in this case, because my ball is the item or the sprite that's highlighted, this says, if the ball is touching Scratch the Cat, then do this. Okay? So since I want it to check if he's touching the ball and then only glide if he's touching the ball, I can actually just drag this whole block right before the glide block, and you'll notice that it kind of wraps around the glide block. So now we're telling it, if the ball is touching Scratch, then start to glide. Okay. The second block also has an else section to it. You'll notice it's a little bit longer. Same type of construct. You're saying, if something is happening, then do this. But now you have a section where you can also say, otherwise, do this. We're not going to use this until a little bit later on, but it's good to know that it exists. So now that we have our basic logic set up, we're going to grab our flag and add it back. And now, if we read through these instructions, what should happen is that when we click that green flag, the ball is going to reset to its original spot. It's going to set its size to 50%, which right now it already is at 50%, so we shouldn't see any kind of change there. And then it's going to check to see if the ball is touching Scratch. And if he is, it's going to glide. I'm going to do that 2 seconds again. Actually, 1 second. It's going to move over the course of 1 second from its original spot to this new spot. So let's see if that works. So what's happening?
Doesn't really look like he's touching the ball yet.
Right. It doesn't really look like he's touching the ball yet. And in fact, if we move Scratch to a different spot, you'll see it's not actually working at all. So he's moving, but this is not doing anything. Any ideas why?
No.
Okay. Coding is incredibly literal. It will only do exactly what you tell it to do, no more and no less. Okay, if we reset everything on our stage here, set that. What you'll see is that when our code block fires, which as it says up the top is when we click the flag button, it runs through this. Okay? But Scratch doesn't actually touch the ball until about half a second after we've clicked the flag button. So what's actually happening is Scratch is running through this immediately, again, just like we saw at the very beginning when we had Scratch moving to the left and the right, and it was happening so fast that we couldn't see it happening. This same thing is happening here. We're clicking the flag. All these things are happening at once. He's being moved to that spot, or the ball is being moved to that spot. Its size is being set to 50%. And the Scratch program is checking if Scratch is touching the ball, which at the moment that we press the flag, he's not. But we're never telling it anywhere to check again or to keep checking if Scratch is touching the ball. We're only telling it to check that one time when we first start the game. And as you can see, he's not touching the ball as soon as we start the program. So what we need to do is we need to tell the program very literally to keep checking that over and over and over. Is Scratch touching the ball yet? Is Scratch touching the ball yet? Is Scratch touching the ball yet? So in our control section, we've got some special blocks that handle exactly these types of situations. And we'll use these all the time when we're making our game to check things like this repeatedly. We're just going to repeat that check over and over and over again. Now, we've got two different types of these repeat blocks. We've got a repeat X block, which just means repeat a certain number of times. Or we have a repeat forever block, which it says forever, but it's only going to check it as long as our program is running, obviously. If you haven't pressed the green button yet, that's not going to happen. So it's not something that happens immediately before your program starts. It only happens once the program starts. So if I wrap, and again, you'll notice that the block is kind of changing size. You can see it's going to kind of swallow or eat up the blocks that we want. So I want to put it just around this if touching section. So now, again, if I read this literally, when we click the flag button, the ball is going to go to this section, set itself to this size, and then forever, until we stop running the program, it's going to check to see if it's being touched by Scratch the Cat. And if so, it's going to move to that section. So now if I click the flag, we're getting more of what we were looking for. Does that make sense? Why it wasn't actually running that and how that forever block fixes that problem?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Now, some other events that we can set up. I mentioned that when flag is clicked is kind of the default block, but we also have those key blocks. So in this case, I can change it so that this only happens when the space key is pressed. So now, if we replace our flag block with this block, we have a little bit more of an actual game. Oops, I got Scratch moving immediately. Try that again. I don't want the ball to move when we hit the space bar. I want Scratch to move. So I need to switch to Scratch. Okay, so now I've changed Scratch. Instead of waiting for the flag to click, he's going to wait for us to press the space bar. So my program is running, the green flag is lit up, and now when I press the space bar, that's when the game is going to run. Now you'll notice that the ball's still moving every time we start the program after that. Unless I reset Scratch's position every time, our game pretty much runs by itself every other time that we run it. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that this reset block happens as soon as our flag is clicked. I'm going to move these around a little bit. So now I have this set so that when we click the flag, Scratch moves back to his spot. But when we press the space bar, then he does his kick. So now we have a little bit more of a game. I can stop this and run this as many times as I want. And Scratch doesn't actually go until we press the space bar. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. One other thing that we might want to do using that forever block, there's also a movement block or a motion block here called go to mouse pointer. We can make our game a little bit more exciting by actually having the player do something rather than just hit a button. Again, we're at the very basics, so it's not going to be much of a game. But rather than having Scratch just move to a specific spot, let's have him move to the mouse and follow the mouse around. And we can do that by telling Scratch, when we click the flag, forever, just follow the mouse pointer. Follow the mouse pointer, follow the mouse pointer, follow the mouse pointer. So now Scratch is going to follow our mouse wherever he goes. And then if we try to kick the ball, it goes into the goal. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to mute my microphone, and if anyone watching or you have any questions, Sandra, feel free to put them in the Q&A section or in the Slack channel, and I'll hang out for another 15 minutes or so, maybe even longer, depending on if we have any other questions, and we'll go from there. I got a message in the Slack channel asking about these direction blocks or these turn blocks. Just like it sounds, if we move Scratch back into the middle of the stage, you can rotate him a certain number of degrees by double clicking on these, and he'll just kind of turn. The only reason these are important, or even these point in direction, these are useful to move your character in a direction if you're planning on moving them. And that's actually a big difference between the move steps blocks or the go to blocks, or these change X by blocks or set X blocks. The move block will move Scratch 10 steps in whatever direction he's facing. So you'll notice if I rotate him, he moves diagonally. If I use one of these change blocks, I'm literally just moving his X and Y coordinates. So he only moves to the left and the right, or up and down. He's never going to move left and right using these other blocks. And I can reset his direction that way. So move follows whatever direction he's pointing. The set or change blocks only move in the X and Y coordinates. Good question. Thanks for asking. All right, if anybody else has any questions, I'll stick around for about 5 more minutes, and then we'll end at 1:30. Okay. Thank you to everyone who's attending today. If you need a refresher or you want to go over any of this stuff again, we'll be repeating the teacher training #1 session today at 3:30 and also tomorrow at 3:30. So feel free to stop by again. Thanks again, and you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.